My next guest is a leader in the oil and gas industry, and that's an understatement probably. Joining me now is Vicki Hollub, President and CEO of Occidental, which has recently announced the goal of net zero emissions in its operations by the year 2040. I thought it was 2050, but if they're doing is it 2040, Vicki, or is it 2050?
It's 2040 for scopes 1 and 2, so that's operations and energy.
So I have to say, I was on
for all emissions.
So I just flew back from Hawaii the other day. I've kind of escaped and wanted to take a trip, went to Hawaii, and I saw the CEO of United Airlines on the little tape saying, hey, we're going to be net zero by 2050. We're going to, do carbon sequestration, look at biofuels, et cetera. And it was a brave statement because, out there. But it's one thing to hear that, and another thing to hear an oil industry say we're going to be net zero, emissions by 2040. Are you going to be, is that going to be an easy lift or a hard lift?
Well, it's going to be a hard lift. I mean, this is not in any way an easy task. And by the way, before I forget it, I want to say that I'm glad you mentioned United Airlines, because I know that Scott Kirby is very sincere about what he's saying. He has a passion around it, and they are actually going to participate in the construction of our first direct air capture facility that we're going to build in the Permian Basin. But this is not easy. And the challenge is that some people don't realize that to achieve the goal of the Paris Accord to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, carbon capture, use, and sequestration is absolutely critical. While we applaud the efforts and the progress that's been made in the wind and solar industry, we've been watching that and seeing the progression and the improvement and all of that, because that's kind of a model of how we'll do the same thing with direct air capture. And we use solar in our operations because we believe we all need to do that. We all need to use renewables where possible. But the other thing that has to happen in the world is a significant amount of taking carbon out of the air and eliminating the emission of carbon from industrial sites. We are doing both, and it's going to take doing both of those things, plus managing the operations that we have today in a different way to achieve our goals. For example, in our own operations, to lower our greenhouse gases, we're really having to think about how should we produce oil and gas differently than the way we produced it over the past 100 years. Things have to be different. So it's not only trying to make sure that you limit the leaks, but design the facilities differently and use the best available technology, get really innovative about how we get our product out of the reservoir and to the end use. And as a part of that too, that's not going to be enough. So while that's the most critical thing we do in our own operations, that's not enough. We also have to capture the emissions from the use of our products. And we have to provide energy for our operations differently. So we're developing two technologies that work on both of those. First is called net power. And net power is a technology that will generate electricity at a lower cost than current power plants. And as a part of the process, it'll capture CO2 that then can be delivered directly to us. We take that and then we can sequester it in our oil reservoirs or in a brine reservoir, or we can use it in products. So we have to have net power for that. Now, the direct air capture and the anthropogenic that we're doing also have to be done in a very big way. With direct air capture, we're taking CO2 straight out of the air, extracting it, and then taking it and also sequestering or using. And we've signed up agreements with White Energy to take CO2 from their two Texas ethanol plants to get to sequestration or use. We're also taking CO2 we'll be taking from a cement plant in Colorado. So there's a lot that needs to be done, but I think that what's missing in this whole equation around how do we make this transition is the fact that carbon capture has to happen. We have to make it economical. And to get to the point where we can make it economical, to get down that curve that wind and solar went through, and to do it as economical and commercially viable as possible for all stakeholders, is to first use that CO2 in oil reservoirs so that we have the benefit of getting some value from the incremental oil, and also the oil produced from the sequestration and use of CO2 is a net neutral barrel of oil from a carbon standpoint.
Right.
And so for the industries that have a hard time getting to net zero, like maritime, aviation, cement plants, steel plants, all of those, even tech, those industries that have a hard time doing it themselves, we can help them with that. We can provide net neutral oil to maritime, to aviation, and that's another thing that United is excited about, is getting that. So it's going to take a lot of effort, and it's going to take people understanding that the transition has to come from using ultimately net neutral oil, because oil is going to be needed for decades to come.
That's it.
And so the only way to accelerate the transition is to use it in the way we're talking about.
That's an amazing panoply of elements that you've just described, and I'm so grateful you did, because I think, honestly, when we have these discussions, we tend to fixate on a small sliver, and you've kind of given us a large ecosystem that's required. I interviewed Tom Fanning a few years ago, CEO of Southern Company, and he said at the time, much along the line, we're going to have to do direct air carbon capture. We're going to have to do massive new technologies in carbon capture and carbon sequestration. But when I spoke to him and I asked him about, was the technology there? Were we able to scale yet? He says, we're close, but not there yet. Are we there now? Has that bridge been made that because I just don't know. Can we do the things that you're sharing, particularly with the direct air capture and the sequestration?
From the direct air capture, we're not there yet, because right now, all the direct air capture facilities in the world, and there's about 15 of them, are too small to make a difference. For example, I think the largest, if my data is current, the largest one right now is capturing 4,000 tons a year. The one that we're going to build in the Permian will capture 1 million tons a year, and that's the kind of scale we have to build. Now, we have a pilot plant with Carbon Engineering working in Canada that's smaller than that. So now what we have to do is scale it up and scale it up to capture 1 million tons a year. But then we have to build a lot of those. And it's going to take I think there's about 40 million tons a year being sequestered in the world today. And it's going to take 100 plus times more than that to be captured. So the 1 million ton per year facility that we're going to build is just the beginning. We've got to build it, and we've got to build it as quickly as possible, start to make it economical, and then start to expand it rapidly around the world. Because if we don't do that, then there's no way we meet the 1.5 degrees. We just don't have the chance to do that. It's vitally important that everybody understand this. Everybody from the CEOs of the investment banks, the CEOs of all the investment houses, the CEOs of the other industries. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to get this message out. We're trying to share it, that we need people to look at the models and understand the models. And if you understand the model, you know that we've got to move, and we've got to move quickly on this. Any delays will push us out beyond 2050, and that's going to cause, we believe, tremendous negative impact on our world.
Vicki, I know that you met President Trump around the time he was trying to solve problems with Saudi Arabia and Russia and oil production and development. And I know you were in the crowd that met them. I know now the Biden administration is reaching out to oil industry executives to kind of find, to sort of lay out what their expectations are, communicate, kind of hear from all of you. And so I'm just sort of interested in your experience with these administrations. One, and they have different perspectives, which I get. Are you finding and understanding, with the Trump crowd, with the vital importance of what you just said everybody needs to do, but with the Biden crowd, are they understanding where the oil and gas industry is and what a huge footprint it is and what it's trying to do? So I guess my question is, do you think these administrations are hearing you?
I think definitely we've been heard. And I think the Biden administration certainly understands the significance and the importance of carbon capture. We recently had the opportunity to meet with Gina McCarthy, who completely understands this and is looking to try to build this into what the administration does. I know they have a goal to try to put a plan together by April 22nd to prepare for COP26. I think they're well aware of, and the indications to me are based on what they're doing and the things they're talking about needing to fund. They clearly get this. And I think the positive thing for our country is that there are bipartisan efforts going on now to put the legislation in place to support this. In fact, without the efforts of Senator Heidi Heitkamp and Senator Brasso and other partisan involvement in the Future Act, we wouldn't be doing this direct air capture today. So that was a bipartisan effort to make sure that 45Q was put in place, or the Future Act. And what it did is provide tax credits for the sequestration and or use of captured CO2. So that's what enabled us to be able to launch our effort to pick up the anthropogenic CO2 and put the direct air capture facility in place. We'll start construction in 2022 on that. And so without that Future Act, we wouldn't be doing it. Now, there's another act that's been introduced by Senators Kuhn and Cassidy. And what it will do is, while the Future Act kicked off the effort to do this in a big way, the Scale Act will provide for more companies getting engaged and making it happen. And we need that, because the more companies that get involved in making it happen, and the sooner, then the better. And that's bipartisan. So I'm really encouraged that the administration, the Republicans, the Democrats, all across the board, people are working together to try to make sure that we get the things in place to do the right things for our country and for our planet. I believe that if we can get the Scale Act passed and the Future Act extended and modified so that instead of tax credit, it's a direct pay, then we're going to have a lot of this happening, and a lot of companies are starting to help with it and to have conversations with us. So there's a movement and there's some momentum right now. We need to build on that. We can't lose any time or any energy around this. But I'm encouraged and I'm excited about it. And I think this is the best chance that we've had in a long time to make it happen in a big way.
Vicki, just real quick, I want to slip on one. I really appreciate that framing, but it's also exciting to hear about the bipartisan support of this. Would some approach to pricing carbon, trading carbon credits, etc., would that help you achieve your goals, or does that help hinder you achieving these goals?
It depends on how it's structured. Like a pure carbon tax probably would not accomplish what we need. It would there would be such a delay in the impact, and then we would be on a different playing field from many of the rest of the countries in the world, and that would disadvantage us, I believe. So I don't believe a carbon tax should ever happen, but I do believe that that the Future Act and the Scale Act, those are the things that's the best idea, the best kind of way to get it started and to make it sustainable over time. There needs to be some sort of price on carbon, but that can be market driven. So I believe that what the administration and what Congress needs to work on now is exactly what they're working on. They're working on the right things. So we need to get that to happen. And I think the price of carbon is going to naturally evolve, because things like the low carbon fuel standard in California, that's a good example of how it's set a price on carbon out there. And the way they have structured that, it encourages innovation. It encourages companies to do things rather than just pay to pollute.
You know, Vicki Hollub, President and CEO of Occidental, I just feel like I've just had the joy of a master class on what at least one part of the oil industry is doing to kind of clean up the climate and deal with carbon, which is one of the big challenges here. Really appreciate your time. You are welcome back anytime, and I hope you will come back.
Thank you, Steve. I very much appreciate it.